Of South Texas Crossfire. This is your attorney, Joe Flores, reminding you to join us each and every week right here on KTMV with the Lopez family. Special thanks to Lopez Broadcasting and my good friend Carlos Lopez. You guessed it, the Hispanic Ted Turner of South Texas. With me today, I have the pleasure of bringing on the founder of Prison Talk, a man who created and helped create the public radio movement there in Houston, Texas, and has done great things for those that are incarcerated. As everybody knows, 1 out of 100 Americans is incarcerated, and we have twice as many prisoners as China, and about at least 1 million more than Russia. So with that, we are bringing on Ray Hill, and I'm honored to have you on. Last time I talked to you, Ray, was about 7 years ago on TV. How are you?
Well, I am fine. As a matter of fact, I'm still hanging around that Houston media source where we did that television. We need to do that some more.
Well, tell us a little bit about your education, training background, life experience.
Well, I'm an ex-convict, and then after I got out of prison, I was in prison from 1970 to 1975. I was sentenced to 160 years, but that seemed to me a little bit untoward for nonviolent crimes against property. I had been a burglar, and a commercial burglar. I didn't like break into people's houses and steal their cutlery and make a danger to their lives. I got in their warehouses while they were home asleep, and I did rather well at that. I got caught, of course. You're never quite too good at that. Then after I got caught, it was a matter of changing that sentence. But after about 4 years, I got a federal judge to make the state of Texas compromise with me, and I left after 4 years, 4 months, and 17 days, and got out and came back to Houston, where I had co-founded the non-commercial Pacifica radio station before I went to prison, and started doing radio again, and then in 1980 became general manager and gave myself time to do the prison show. And I did the prison show for 30-plus years, and then I decided that I wasn't going to really make any difference in the propensity of people to get locked up in this country, so I retired from the prison show. It continues with other hosts and producers, and I took up a movement to end mass incarceration. It's a complex issue, but for many decades, state and federal legislators get together, and the solution to every problem is either another new criminal statute for which people can be sent to prison, or the enhancement of punishment on an existing one. And that's not working out real well for us. At the present time, we have more people locked up than anybody in the world. The United States has less than 5% of the world's population. We have more than 25% of the world's inmates.
That's incredible.
And on top of the 220 million, the 2.25 million people we have locked up in prisons, we have that many or more locked up in county jails and city jails, and then we have more than that under some kind of supervision. So a very significant percentage of American population are just really not at liberty at present. And that falls disproportionately on black and Hispanic populations in the extreme. And, of course, everybody in prison is poor, and so people are helpless. And the trouble of it is that somebody somewhere down the line figured out how to make money off of those convicts, and so the private prison industry is booming. Their stock is going on very well, and locking people up for corporate profit seems to be an especially bad idea.
Well, and you bring out two interesting points of many that I wanted to focus in on. and the one was Prison Talk. Now, a lot of people don't understand that this was the only way these people were getting their media, their support, their line. Tell us a little bit about Prison Talk when you found it and why you started Prison Talk Radio.
At the time we began, Texas did not allow inmates in Texas prisons access to telephone. Other prison systems did, and the Fed did, but in Texas there was no inmate access to telephone. So we went on the air, and I decided to use the radio to have family members call the station, and I just put them on the air so that a mother who was handicapped or housebound, living in a trailer park in Pasadena, Texas, could call the prison show and talk to her son in a Texas prison over the radio. The messages were brief. They were extremely hard to listen to because that was the only communication for some people. And so they would talk about just minute details of their family life. And the listeners got to eavesdrop on that, and it changed a lot of people's attitude and made people begin to see inmates as human members of families instead of the monsters that the media painted of them during their arrest and trial sequences.
Yeah, it's a very dehumanizing process. And you mentioned that, I had quoted that there was 2.5 million prisoners, but then you brought out the interesting point, county, and then you have probation, then you have parole.
Yeah, there's just a whole bunch of people that are denied access to liberty, of which we as a nation boast.
Well, and people may say, well, you
home of the brave and land of the free, that's apparently propaganda made up for the Chamber of Commerce, because in the nation that locks more people up than other people, I don't know how we can get away with continuing that claim.
Well, and what are you working on right now that is you created that legacy, the prison show. What are we doing right now for those people that are incarcerated, and what movements are you doing on the ground?
I'm focusing on the real possibility that we can actually do something about mass incarceration. You say, oh, well, if you're going through this process, Joe, by yourself, it's you against the rest of the world. Your son or your husband or a member of your family's in jail, and you're isolated, and you don't have enough resources to provide the kinds of defense representation that you can do and others can do, and you're scared, and it seems like it's the whole world stacked against you. Well, as long as that continues, they are able to move us individually around like sheep. But there is a gate in the pen in which we are entrapped. It's called the electoral process. Now, politicians sit up there fat and fine. They're getting paid by lobbyists, and they're representing the private prison industry and all kinds of things. But let me tell you, it's a little something from old dope culture. Votes will get those politicians through times of no money a lot better than money will get them through times of no votes. There you go. So, two things. In Texas, there was a piece of legislation called the Ray-Hill Bill, passed in 1985, and it automatically restored the right to vote to every convicted felon in Texas at the end of their sentence. So all the former inmates can now vote. Plus the fact that each inmate knows one or two or three or a dozen friends, family, supporters that can also vote. If we were able to lace those votes together, and we went to the legislature and we said, you are cowards for yielding to the private prison profiteers, and we've got enough votes to take you out of the office if you don't change the laws. Now, there's a little organization called the American Law Institute. It is basically the Bar Association for law professors. They are standing at the ready to draft another model penal code. They drafted one in the early 60s, and they're willing to do it again, decriminalizing whole classes of offenses that have grown out of the war on drugs, getting rid of mandatory minimums, taking a serious look at the rationale we use for mandatory supervision and other kinds of things like registration of former felons. Look at all of that with a clean sheet of paper mentality, and we simply come up with better, smarter, more interest in public safety resolutions to the problems before us.
Well, and you think that there is, I don't see any empirical or scientific basis for how they reach the mandatory minimums or the guideline sentences?
No, it was political gobbledygook.
I had a federal...
The Rockefeller laws, basically the genesis of that.
Right.
And Rockefeller was afraid somebody was going to call him a liberal, and he had presidential things, so he came up with the most draconian idea. It kind of makes sense to the people that didn't know what they were talking about, and it made him look like a tough guy.
Well, and, just today, before we came on air, there was a federal judge I stood in front of, and really, that federal judge's hands were tied with the guideline range, which was ridiculous. First-time drug offender, 20, 30 years, and that judge had the courage and conviction to say no. Gave the mandatory minimum when she didn't have to, and did it. And even then, that's a long time for a first-time drug offender.
And one of the problems I hope your audience understands that we have right now is the time the case was filed, not today, but back when the case was filed, there was no conversation at all about leaving the weight of the drugs in the charge off of paper. Since then, the Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, has gone before the Bar Association and says, as a matter of policy, the federal government is not going to announce the weight of the drugs in the charges. Now, he said that. Now, if that's been implemented, I don't know. One of the great blessings of my life, Joe, is that I'm not a lawyer, and so I don't have to get up and practice law every day. But if the Attorney General says it to the Bar Association, you can bet your bippy sooner or later it will be the law.
Eric Holder said for far too long we've housed too many people, and I want to take my hat off to him. Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, has said for far too long we've incarcerated too many people for too many bad reasons.
And Eric Holder would not have said that if he had not had a conversation with the President of the United States so that would become an announced policy of the administration. And that's an enormously courageous thing. Of course, the administration is not going to be seeking re-election. So they can have a little more, excuse the expression, balls now than they could if they were running into their second term.
Right.
So it's time for a little courage, but to make that a fait accompli, to make that reality, I want your Hispanic listeners to understand that when the Hispanic communities of Texas get their political act together, they become the big dog on the block.
We rocked an election. We rocked a presidential election this last time.
And I want you to hold that together, and I want you to focus, because all politics is local. I want you to talk to your state representatives and your state senators, and those of you who have sons and husbands and daughters in Texas prisons, let it be known. Get out of that closet and say, I want my child, my husband, my breadwinner back home, because locking him up doesn't accomplish anything except make him more hardened and more likely to commit another crime. Send him home. I will keep him in line.
Right. And that's what we're talking about. We're going to take a break. When we come back, We're going to be talking more with the founder of Prison Talk, Ray Hill, and also someone who is making waves in Washington and locally here and in Houston. And we're going to be talking more about these outrageous draconian sentences that must change here in America that are disproportionately against blacks and Hispanics. Stay tuned.
Have you been arrested or are potentially facing criminal charges? You need a trial attorney who is well-versed in the courtroom. Joe Flores has handled hundreds of criminal cases and many of them to trial. Joe Flores can provide you with competent representation to protect your constitutional rights in state and federal court. Joe Flores can help if you have been arrested or facing criminal charges. The law offices of Joe Flores. Equal justice for all. Have you or a loved one suffered a stroke, heart attack, unexplained low blood pressure, or death during dialysis? The FDA has issued warnings and recalled the product Granuflo and Naturalite used in dialysis. At least one national company failed to warn the public that over 900 people had suffered cardiac arrest or death. A condition called metabolic alkalosis developed, which may have caused the harm. Call the law offices of Joe Flores today. With a combined 25 years of experience in the medical field and as a trial lawyer, Joe Flores can help. Call now.
Hi, this is attorney and board-certified nurse practitioner Joe Flores on behalf of Vasquez Flores Home Health. Nursing homes have their place, but having care in your own home is very important. Call today for more information. Backed by over 20 years of experience, registered nurse Priscilla Vasquez can answer your questions about home care. Call 881-9922. That's 881-9922 today. And we're back after a brief break. You're listening to South Texas and watching South Texas Crossfire, simultaneously broadcast on radio and television and on the internet, and soon to be on print media as well. We also like to thank our sponsor, El Defensor magazine. That's eldefensor.blogspot.com. Homero Villarreal, a champion for the truth in print media. And with me, my good friend and guest, Ray Hill, the founder of Prison Talk, and wonderful things he's done on public radio. And now we're going to be talking about how these families that have their loved ones in prison, how they can get networked in and become part of the pressure that's being put on these politicians to stop these long sentences. Welcome back, Ray.
Well, thank you for having me back after the break. I spent last Saturday in Washington, D.C. I went up to the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, where Dr. King gave that wonderful speech that we all remember. And I flew up just Friday evening, spent all day Saturday there, and caught a late flight back to Houston. I went to the Lincoln Memorial and looked at the crowd that they drew. Well, before the event, the organizers were talking about hundreds of thousands of people coming to the march. Well, when I got there, they changed the language to tens of thousands, and as a matter of fact, they had exactly about 30,000 people there, which made the crowd in 63 look like a horde, and they looked like a committee. And so you've got to rethink activism. That was 20th century activism in 1963, and I've led a couple of marches on Washington, one against the war in Vietnam and another for lesbian and gay equality. So I know how to do that, but that kind of organization is passé. Ultimately, all politics are local. So if you want to make a difference in the political framework, you need to work in Corpus Christi, and you need to work in Laredo, and you need to work in Edinburgh, and you need to work in San Antonio, and I need to work in Houston. And the tools I am using here is I'm forming a coalition with the people from NORML, the National Organizations to Reform Marijuana Laws. And I'm working with people mothers against mandatory minimums. I'm working with the law enforcement against prohibition, because those are cops who know that the war on drugs hurts more than it helps by a wide range. And, of course, the real important people to me are the families of people who are in prison. So if you're out there and you're listening and you're interested in these issues, you don't have to have somebody in prison. You may have been to prison or know somebody who's been to prison. And you know they didn't come out better than they went in. You know that they had all kinds of stresses and strains, because once you adapt to prison society, you're ill-prepared to readapt back into this one. So all of you out there listening, the first thing to do is to get networked in. I don't know if you have a computer, but if you don't have a computer, they got one down at the corner at the library. Go to the public library, and they'll help you get on the computer. Find Facebook. You don't need a computer to have a Facebook page.
That's right. You can get on your phone.
Yeah. Join Facebook. And when you join Facebook, we have a Facebook organizing tool. It's called End Mass Incarceration Community. When you find Facebook, put in END, E-N-D, Mass, M-A-S-S, Incarceration, I-N-C-A-R-C-E-R-A-T-I-O-N, Community.
End Mass Incarceration Community on Facebook. Get on there
Facebook,
and friend them and like them right now.
That will take you to our site. All you got to do is click join.
And that's End Mass Incarceration. End Mass Incarceration
Community.
Community.
Mass Incarceration Community. Click join and you're in, and we will send you bulletins about what's in the news. Who else is talking about ending mass incarceration? The whole idea is to give people who thought they did not have a friend in the world absolute knowledge that they are not alone.
That's right.
And if you're not alone, you're empowered to talk about, while you're there, get involved in your community. If you're a member of a Hispanic community in Corpus Christi, Texas, you need to support the leadership of that community, help select the leadership of that community, and keep your ear to the ground about all of the things that are in the news that affect the quality of life in that community. Look, I'm this guy from Houston, Texas, that you never heard of before, but I'm telling you, if you want a better world, you build it. And what we're doing down here is we've got our hands on a film called The House I Live In. It is the most simple explanation of what is wrong with the laws that were passed in the war on drugs and whose life that those laws destroy. You need to be aware of that. And by the way, all of you out there who have sons, daughters, brothers, husbands in Texas prison, next time you communicate with them, tell them that Uncle Ray Hill of the Prison Show sends his love and regards. They know who I am. They've been listening to me for 30 years. And they have found hope in this voice. And they have found reason to look at the things they do in their lives that have contributed to their oppression. And I want you to have hope. I don't come at this from a religious perspective, but if you do, that's fine. There are church groups out there that you can join. The main thing is don't be alone. We can only accomplish anything if we do it all together. And Joe, you have no idea how much I appreciate this opportunity to come on your show and talk about things that are probably too important to an old convict who has now reached the age of 72 and starting a new movement. But we can make a difference here. I congratulate you on your work, And next time you're in Houston, by the way, that's that cup of coffee you promised me from doing the show.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, we've got a few minutes left, but I wanted to focus in on the community activism. We've got a few minutes left, and you've told me that, you know, End Mass Incarceration is that Facebook page that we need to get involved with. And the house I live in, where can they get that film, or is that uploaded on
you can
YouTube?
go, they have a website. It's thehouseilivein.com. It's a commercial operation. It actually comes in two forms. There's an hour and 50-minute version of it, and then there's about a 1-hour version of it that they cut for broadcast. The longer one, I mean, the longer I watch that film, the more I'm... Joe, you know me. I haven't had any drugs or alcohol since January the 4th, 1959. But watching that movie brought me up to speed of the horrible things that the laws, draconian laws in federal state courts do things. They drive the price of drugs up so that money becomes the motivation for young people's lives, and it's a horrible situation. And we have to address that. That alone is deserving of a movement, and the movie illustrates that. You will come out of that movie being motivated to help make change.
And you know, for our Spanish listeners out there, en el radio que lo está escuchando, es absurdo la idea que las dos necesidades que dicen que son ilegales aquí en este país, entrar sin permiso y son laboreros, y también traer drogas, those things that I just said in Spanish, labor forces and drugs, the things that we want Mexico to outlaw and not bring in, are the very things that we're the biggest consumer of: cheap labor and cheap drugs.
All of this carnage that we read about in Mexico,
we're to blame.
Is not a product
in
of drugs. It's a product of the war on drugs.
And I mean, there's 100,000 casualties in Mexico right now.
Yes.
We are 5%.
Our addiction and thirst to those drugs is causing those people to lose their lives.
We have a $400, help me out here, $1 million habit for cocaine.
Oh, yes.
We're snorting up about 25% of the world's need right here in the United States, and we're 5% of the population or less.
Yeah.
And on marijuana, the ridiculous sentences they're giving for bringing in marijuana. Well, I've never heard mass killer kills 40 at a movie theater after smoking marijuana. No, after years of taking pharmaceutical drugs and altering their brain chemistry.
Right.
When you have 5-year-old children coming home from school and saying, "Mommy, they had us on lockdown today," that is teaching and indoctrinating children to get used to being in prison. When I did juvenile hall, 11, 12-year-olds in shackles and hand and foot shackles coming in, chained up and wearing scrubs, that is just inculcated in their mind to get used to being sheeple, as I like to call it. Sheep that are people, that are just being controlled. So we need to stop this. Again, we've got a minute left. I talk way too much. Ray, take it away. Closing arguments.
Well, Joe, I think what is important is that your program reaches people that are otherwise not easy to reach. I mean, you tune into Joe's program, number one, because Joe's a good entertainer and he holds your attention, but number two, he's got information that there is a hunger for. Today, some of that information came from this old guy in Houston, Texas.
And we love you, Ray.
Been doing this an awfully long time. And I want you to know that you look at Texas, and the governor of Texas ran for president by traveling all over the country, stoned out of his gourd on Oxycontin. And everybody feels sorry for him because he had to take those pain pills. But nobody's talking about locking him up. But if your Hispanic son or your black daughter was stoned on the same thing and went to the grocery store, she or he may go to prison for 10 years. We cannot continue that kind of disparity in our criminal justice system.
And that's right, the state versus federal system. I'm a part of both, and I respect the judges in that system, but their hands are bound by these ridiculous guidelines that are twice as much as England, 3 times as much as Canada, and 5 to 10 times as much as France on the long sentences. 30 seconds. And where can these people get involved in? Of course, here locally, but they're going to go to Facebook. But what about contacting Prison Talk or getting wired in? What other avenues?
you know, you can, when you get on the internet, and all of you have computers or smartphones, congratulations. If you don't have that, don't be intimidated by that, because your public library has, for free of charge, your access to the internet. And when you get in the internet, put in things like prison reform. Put in your city's name and like prison reform, and find out if there's a Texas Inmate Families Association in your town or even in your village, or some contact. The main thing is to get networked in. Do not go at this alone. You need some support, and it's already there waiting for you to ask for it. And again, thank you, Joe.
All right, well, that was Ray Hill, and we want to thank him for coming on. And remember, Prison Talk and Google Reform on prison, and also go to Facebook. Let's not forget the House I Live In website. Google that, or End Mass Incarceration on Facebook. This is Attorney Joe Flores. Once again, thanks to Ray Hill for interviewing from Houston, Texas. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Joe.